So I was very excited to ask Dr. Evan Glazer if he could come and talk to us a little bit. I know he has done some research on how to attract and the influences that parents, that school systems, that educators can have on students to get them excited about STEM fields. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Evan Glazer. He is the principal at Thomas Jefferson High School, which most people just call TJ, for science and technology. The school, as well as under the leadership of Dr. Glazer, has won a variety of awards, really emphasizing or supporting research and an increase in interdisciplinary and collaborative efforts and social responsibility. He also has a BS and a master's in mathematics, so for all those kids or for the teachers who those kids say, well, what can I do with mathematics? Well, we love mathematics majors, and you can do a whole variety of things. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can share with us.
I have till, we're going to shoot for about till 9:20, is that right? And then do a little time for Q&A? Okay, great. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to be here. I want to get a feel for the audience. Raise your hand if you are a high school educator. Okay, and raise your hand if you're a high school student. Okay, that's terrific. And raise your hand if you are an elementary middle school educator. Great. And how about if you're from the government sector? Excellent. And corporate sector? All right, so government education. So we're going to ask a lot of corporations, right? Help us out. I'm here to talk a little bit about the pipeline, and part of the pipeline is really I'm going to reveal a lot of research that's been done. I won't reveal all the research that's been done, but I'll give you a lot of references and sources, and also a website at the end where you can find the slide deck where you can access some of these resources, and contact me if you're also looking to read more about what would influence students to stay in the K-12 or K-16 pipeline and become STEM professionals. Certainly, a lot of us already know that there's a huge demand for information security professionals. Those are just a few snapshots, but on a regular basis, we know that the demand is huge. So we ask ourselves, how do we increase our workforce in STEM, and in particular areas where there are shortages? This is a great concern for people in our profession. One answer is to start them early. That's my son Luke, who just managed to jump on my laptop when he has the chance to help me out with presentations. But there's actually a lot of different factors, and I'll go through some of them. I'll have to say that the research that's out there's not obvious answers, but there's a lot of good clues. And the reason why I say there aren't obvious answers is I haven't found research that does a lot of multiple regressions to tease out which variables will have the greatest influence. A lot of us look for help trying to understand what's going to make the largest difference, and let's work at that. And the reality, which I'll share with you, is there are at least 16 different variables, and I don't think that I'll show you a comprehensive view. I think I'll show you 16 different variables, and then I'll be seeking your input, and your perspectives, and your reflections as professionals and as students of which of those kind of seem particularly important to you. So these are reflections from independent research studies that have been gathered by different people around the country to show what helps students or deter students from being interested in STEM. And then ultimately, we have to use some of our expertise and experience to reflect on what's going to make a difference. So that's the focus of my presentation. And then I've had some conversations with students who are really involved in information security, computer architecture. We asked them also for their own practical advice, and I'll share that as well. So when we talk about when students or people are interested in going to different career paths, we ask ourselves, what are the influential factors? So sociological, biological, contextual, all influence aptitude and ability patterns. So that will help them ultimately influence academic performance and career interests, which allow a career choice. In fact, that developmental review article by Wayne DeGaulle, and this is a theoretical framework from Eccles, but Wayne DeGaulle, that article itself is actually terrific to look at a lot of the different variables. All the 16 different variables that I'll share with you today, they're all presented in that article, and they actually do a much better job than I can in a presentation. So Robert Tye at the University of Virginia did a study a little bit around 10 years ago that looked at what will influence students to go into different STEM careers, and there's 3 different colors there. The top color, which isn't really visible, I guess what they say is gray, are all the people who don't go into STEM fields. The darker color in the middle are students from 8th grade who decide to go into physical sciences, mathematically related fields. And then the lower level, which is kind of a light green, I think, are those students who go into life sciences. The left chart, so students essentially were asked as part of this study in 8th grade, do you think that you're going to go into STEM or science? And, of course, just a little bit over 10% said, yes, I definitely want to go into a career in science, and then the others said, I don't want to go into a career in science. And then they followed those kids for 12 years. And then they said, okay, well, what happened to these students? Okay? And let's use as an independent variable how they're performing on a math achievement test, a standardized test. And I think the mean score of that test is somewhere between 45 and 50. I think it's fairly normally distributed. So they said if we base student interest, those who were interested on the left, saying yes, they want to go into science. Those who were like, no, I don't really want to go into science in 8th grade, so that's an early indicator. You can kind of get a sense of some of the variables that relate to students choosing a science major in college and then going on to be a science professional. So those are actually, whether or not they earn the degrees in science. And you can see there's a strong trend, first based on interest. So the graph on the left shows a greater percentage of students going into science than the graph on the right. In fact, it also shows a correlation between performance and math. But what I like about it actually is if you have interest in science and not necessarily high performance in math, it still shows a great interest in pursuing that as a degree. So, in fact, that outperformed performance. So what I mean by that is, if you take a look at that graph, you have some students on the left-hand side who said, I'd like to pursue a career in science, and I may not even perform that well in math, but I really like science. Those students on the left-hand side here still pursue degrees in science, so math isn't necessarily an inhibiting factor, which I think is great. In fact, the numbers here on the left-hand side, it's about 48%. That's far greater than the students who are great in math, who didn't express that interest in science. So that tells us, based on a longitudinal study, that getting that interest early by middle school, those of you who raised your hand as elementary and middle school educators, you have a huge, huge role in shaping students' interest to the point where, it's more than half. And those of you who are high school educators or government professionals, don't worry too much, because you can still have a great influence in about 1/3 of the the population, you can see that there's still a third of the students who can be influenced into going into STEM, even if they didn't express that by 8th grade. Okay, now I'm going to start going into some of the factors associated with students' interest in STEM. So the first category is intellectual aptitude and motivational beliefs. Okay, so those are 4 different factors, and what I want you to do is read them, and I'm going to pause actually for a couple of minutes intentionally, and I would like for you to discuss with the people next to you which of those factors really stands out in your mind as it's either influencing or detracting kids into STEM. Okay, so choose 1, 2, 3, or 4 which of those you think really stands out, and then talk with a neighbor. Number 1, how about number 2? Raise your hand if number 2 really stood out. Okay, and how about number 3? Okay, number 4. Yeah, so it seemed like 3 and 4 were really what stood out. You know what blew me away was number 2. That totally surprised me. And essentially the research is saying that students, females who are particularly really strong in both categories, go to other types of career paths like law. I mean, they're very high achieving. We talk a lot about gender gaps in underrepresentation of females, and that's one of the influencing factors which really blew me away. You know, there's also some stereotypes that are portrayed in the public, and this is an old story. Some of you may remember this. This is from 1992. 1992, where they had a talking Barbie doll, teenage Barbie, that had, you know, said about 270 random things, and one of them was that math class was really tough. So that certainly alerted the whole math community, like, what are you doing, right? You don't want a doll to be giving any messages, even if math class is tough, to indirectly suggest that females shouldn't be going into math. So that was quickly removed. In fact, I think it's like a hot commodity item just to find that, because it's so rare, right? Because they're like, oops, we messed up, and now it only says 269 random sayings. And then there's also great positive messaging. So, you know, in the last few years, there have been many great advertisements. This is from a Goldie Blocks video. I don't know if you've seen it before, but it's really selling toys to encourage engineering among girls. It's a fun video to check out. They create this like big Rube Goldberg machine in the video. So there's a lot of positive messaging about encouraging girls to understand. Okay, so let's go into social influence. So here's the next category, social influence. Take a look at numbers 5 through 8. I'm going to pause for a couple of minutes. Discuss with your neighbors on which of those really stand out to you. How many did number 5 really stand out? Okay, and how many for number 6 stood out? And then number 7, and then number 8. So I think based on the people in the room, we felt 7 stood out the most. You know, for me, as a principal of a school, number 8 really means a lot. You know, developing personal relationships, and the kids feel motivated when their teachers express interest in them and getting them excited about their field. Number 6 also stands out from a cognitive perspective for me, because anytime someone develops a sense that they are good or not good at something, then they start developing a sense of efficacy about what they're capable of doing and what they're not capable of doing, versus the notion of saying, you know, keep at it, you can do this, this is hard, but I really believe that you can do this, and we're going to focus on your improvement, no matter how smart you are. That makes such an extraordinary difference, because otherwise students constantly think about how bad they are at something, or that they run into ethical dilemmas that when they're not meeting the expectations of how smart they should be, then some of them start to cheat. So that's fascinating research, number 6. In fact, you know, Dweck has a popular book called Mindset. If you haven't read it, it's an interesting read, just related really to number 6, this idea that you really have to focus on effort in gains, not necessarily how good you are at something. Gladwell has an interesting book, Outliers. There's a chapter on achievement gap, and what stood out in that chapter to me was, as it pertains to effort, is that a lot of times an achievement gap occurs as due to the amount of time we invest in working on something. So students from middle and upper class families are often involved in enrichment programs really starting in elementary school. And so that accumulates over time. The students are spending more time after school, on weekends, in summers, doing extra educational things, and spending more time engaged in STEM or whatever it is that they're interested in. And so then you would see, just solely based on time on task, time on learning, the students would naturally outperform when they're given more opportunities. And so we have to be very conscious as educators to try and provide opportunities to those families who wouldn't naturally be able to provide enrichment or summer programming. Okay, since we're talking about schools, there is some research on STEM schools. So there are different types of STEM schools. So you have specialized programs within a school, career and technical education schools, and selective schools as being the primary types. And even in the selective, you have residential, you know, statewide public schools that are part of university systems, comprehensive, which is my school, school within a school. You know, you have some of those in Maryland. And half-day specialized, we go for half of a day, and then for a specialized program, we would return. So there's many different types, and since I'm speaking, I can do some shameless promotion, tell you a little bit about my school. So in Virginia, there's 19 different governor schools. We're the one in Northern Virginia. Those are all specialty programs. 3/4 of them are STEM related. Some of them are full day, some of them are half day. Pull-out programs were a full day comprehensive program. Our students get involved in research in a collaborative way right away as freshmen in integrated biology, English, and technology, sequence of 3 courses. So the approach we take to get students involved in hands-on research is we take 3 classes and team them together. So in a block schedule, hour and a half, break, hour and a half, break, hour and a half. You know, that's 4.5 to 5 hours of time together. So if you want to go out in the field and work on research, it doesn't disrupt the rest of the schedule. So you can do a lot of natural work in a collaborative way if you team classes. So that works for us. Now, by their senior year, they go to a culminating research project. So it's a requirement as part of our STEM school that students are involved in doing a comprehensive research project in any of those areas that are listed. So there's a lot of variety available to the students, and the ones that are going into cyber fields are most likely the ones going into computer systems. So it's a sample project. We rely on partnerships. Students can create their own projects based on what's based on the review of literature, but partnerships also help us. There's an example of an engineering one where students developed a satellite. It was really a 7-year journey to develop a satellite in collaboration with Orbital that thanks to NASA helped in Orbital help launch it into space in 2013. We also involve mentors, which are very important both internally to the school, which is on the right, and externally, where students are given an opportunity to go off campus. So about 15% of our students are going off campus to do their work in a specialized facility. So a sample project, a cyber project, actually where students went to a local university, Here's one where you have a denial of service, where you have attackers who are taking an indirect route and just overwhelming a server by routing it through other servers. And so that student's project was finding a way, devising a software that will ultimately help the outgoing communication recognize that someone's trying to reroute traffic, so that it actually never really goes very far outside of the internal server. So we have students who will do research projects related to information security, but as I showed you earlier, we open it to every possible field and try to support students as best as we can with the resources in the school or working with professionals, which means a lot to us. We're also in development, thanks to a collaboration with Northrop Grumman and Cisco, to create a Jefferson Collaborative Inquiry and Research Network, which enables students to connect to outside professionals who can give them feedback on the research or get involved with them on the research projects. So we're not relying solely on programming, enlisting in a mentorship program where you have to drive off-site in order to get mentor support, but instead thinking of virtual platforms to engage more professionals. We believe in outreach, that our students are also mentors, where we connect to our local schools through a program called Ambassadors, not just our students, but other students in our community from other high schools. So here's some of the research associated with students who are part of STEM schools on whether or not they were interested in entering high school and whether or not they completed an undergraduate degree. So on the left-hand column are those people who attended a STEM school, on the right-hand column are those people who didn't attend a STEM school and they had very high aptitude in math and science. And so that research was trying to get at what are some characteristics, or does going to STEM school matter in terms of going to the pipeline? That was the first question, so that's the comparison of 65 to 47%. Knowing that some kids go to a STEM school but aren't really interested in science. That happens too. That's true of my school. I would say a quarter of the students are in that. They just like going there because they think it's a good school. And in fact, those students are less likely to go into STEM, so they say, hey, I'm not interested in science or STEM. I just want to go to this school because it's a good school, and sure enough, a quarter of them, they don't. Only a quarter of them end up earning a degree in STEM versus the control group, which was actually a little bit higher. Okay, so here's my question to you. So part of the research, they actually had different variables. So this is a multiple regression model where they said, look, here are some really important factors that students should have in their high school experience. If they go to a STEM school, here are some really important experiences. Discuss among yourselves whether you think A, B, C, or D had the largest impact in order to major in the STEM field in college. That's the outcome. So which of those variables, A, B, C, or D, had the greatest influence on determining whether students majored in the STEM field in college? Go ahead and talk for a minute. Rita Sabatnik, so Robert Tyson, University of Virginia, very interested in career paths in STEM, great resource. Rita Sabatnik's at the American Psychological Association. They were part of a huge team that did the STEM school study. And TJ was part of it. There's like 75 schools in the country that were part of it. All of these made a difference. In fact, they would say in their concluding remarks that it's really, one of these independently doesn't have as much power as thinking about all of these contextually. So if schools programmatically think about doing all of these things, then there's really a high likelihood that students are going to be involved in STEM majors in college based on their research, because they were looking at alumni. They surveyed alumni 5, 10, 15 years out to see what they were doing after they went to these schools. All right, how many of you thought A made the largest difference? How many thought B made the largest difference? How many thought C? How about D? Okay, so I think you voted B and D And interestingly, then this is counterintuitive because the largest impact was A. So as I mentioned before, so essentially what this means is that they had 70% more were, there was an increase in likelihood that students were involved in a STEM major. So they were 70% more likely to be in a STEM major if they participated in or conducted original scientific research while they were in high school. So that was a critical component. But all of these are important. They're all providing influence in a direction, or at least just, retrospective, asking people who are alumni from these schools, tell us, they said, well, now, tell us what you're doing now, and tell us what influenced that. And those people who went in STEM, they're essentially saying that these are the top 4, and A is the one that made the largest difference to them. Okay, so I mentioned I had 16 factors, so here's 9 through 12. Now we're into the family influence to pursue STEM, so take a look at 9 through 12, discuss with the people next to you which ones really stand out. Let's get your take on these from 9 through 12. So how many feel number 9 really stood out? Okay, how about number 10? How about number 11? How about number 12? Okay, so 9 to 12. And what's fascinating, out of all the research I've shared with you, it's fairly recent, except for number 12, out of everything. Parenting has the test of time, right? People have been parenting for thousands and thousands of years. And the children learn a lot from their parents just by observing their actions, which define values, family values. I'll tell you a little bit more about 12 in a different study out of the University of Chicago in a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about parenting styles. So I've explored this a lot, actually. And there's all different types of parenting styles, right? And this research is actually started around, from Baumrind around 50 years ago, but has changed the nature. We've changed the words. But Baumrind said, well, there's the authoritarian parent, and then here's some characteristics. And then more recently, it's been called the tiger parent. And then some people use the authoritative parent, with those characteristics up there is a dolphin. So we're using these metaphors. The parents are animals. The jellyfish parent. Now there's another type of parent, which is part of Baumrind's research, which is the neglectful parent. And I'm not going to really bring that one up as a particular type of animal, or really reflect on the neglectful parent for the purposes of my presentation. Because I'm trying to connect to what's influencing kids to go into STEM. And that parenting style is not going to have much influence at all. There are parenting style tests. You can find them on the internet in various places if you want to get a sense of where you as a parent may land. And so you may be curious then how that influences how students do in school. How does your parenting style influence how students do in school, as well as whether or not they pursue STEM? So, actually there's more parenting styles. More recently, people have the kangaroo parent, the lion parent, the panda parent. But the research doesn't focus on these other styles, and some parents themselves would say it all depends on the context. Okay, I'm going to act as this type of parent because of certain conditions that my child is expressing. So I don't intend to put everyone in a box. This is a lot more complicated, but there are some patterns. So Sanford's research mentioned that children of authoritative parents, which is the dolphin style, tend to have higher achievement in school. However, there's no difference among Asian heritage families as it relates to parenting style. And Hispanic females tend to have lower achievement with authoritarian parents. And then Reeves, they had a report in 2013 from the Brookings Institute that talked about how much does it influence achievement, how much do parents matter. And they concluded that they matter, but not as much as parents think that they matter. So parents influence about a third. And genetics and non-family environment, sociocultural, what happens at school, what happens with friends, and things like that. And they did notice that low income and low parent education are huge barriers to student achievement. So here's a study of some economists from University of Chicago, Levitt and Dubner, and Freakonomics, which is kind of a fun book to read. And they had a chapter in it, and I guess this is, I don't know, 10, 15 years old. So they had a chapter of what makes a perfect parent. So parents think like, what should I do with my child to get them really excited and go on and do great things? You know, do I go to Head Start programs, have all the books? Am I concerned about how much television they're watching? Does having two parents at home make a really big difference? How about our education? You know, should I read to them every day? Should I take them to museums? Should I stay home, you know, in their early development phases, or take them to daycare? Should I be involved in my school's PTSA? Is that going to really influence the success of my child, success defining, you know, are they going off to college and being good citizens? And what they found in their study is that actually none of those variables play as much of a role as that study I shared with you from the 1960s on how role modeling and parent behavior has the greatest influence on how students do in school. So it's what we do as parents that will ultimately model behaviors about work ethic, about attitude, about perseverance, stick-with-itness, about how we think about different subject areas and how that's conveyed directly or indirectly to our children has the greatest influence. Okay, the last category is social cultural influences. Based on our time, we're going to talk about 5 more minutes. I won't ask you to vote on this one, but here are some other social cultural influences. I think number 14 is fascinating. There's also a part of the research in number 14 that American parents not only tend to emphasize ability, they tend to overestimate students' ability compared to Asian heritage families. So that's an interesting read. But those are some of the social cultural factors that influence involvement in STEM. Now those are 16 factors. Those aren't all of them, there are probably some others. And in no way, from number 1 to 16, you know, I asked you to vote because I don't know of any research that actually weighs these against each other. If you do, certainly send it to me. I'm very interested in this. My career is invested in this. Okay, so the main implications from research, certainly what happens by middle school is crucial. Try to get students involved in hands-on research and projects, because that, we saw, does play the largest difference. Certainly if you see talent or potential among your high math performers, and then finding resource gaps. So there's all these things that deter students from getting involved in STEM. So celebrate the counterexamples. So for example, at my school, we have a Coding Lady Colonials. We intentionally created a club. It's not only for women, it's dominated by women. However, they created a club to promote females' interest in coding. It's extremely popular. They run their own high school hackathon. So those of you who are high school students, we run a hackathon every spring. They run a hackathon every spring. We really want to celebrate the great things that students are doing that aren't necessarily what people stereotype, to really bring out that there's a lot of potential, workforce potential, and expanding the capabilities of our profession thanks to who hasn't been involved. So we have to celebrate that, in my opinion. Okay, now I'm just going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity. I first actually became interested in cybersecurity many years ago when I read The Cuckoo's Egg. Raise your hand if you've read that book, The Cuckoo's Egg. A few of you. So it's a true story about how someone hacked into Berkeley's labs, computer systems many years ago. I mean, I think it's like late 80s. So it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool read. So some foundational aspects of cyberspace. These are the core content areas, at least identified by the Army cyber security folks, of being important content areas because it's a multidisciplinary field. And we talk about the value of also skills that people need to develop to be successful in this career path. The research is actually very limited on what influences students to go into information technology fields. So there are a few reports that I referenced there. However, it's not nearly as extensive as the stuff that I showed you earlier. So the Center for Technology and National Security Policy has developed a series of recommendations for what we could do to get students more involved or broaden the STEM pipeline, particularly in information security and cyber-related fields. I'll provide you the website where you can access this and spend more time looking at it. I asked a bunch of kids who go to cyber competitions regularly because they love it. And I asked them, and by the way, I know there are pictures of all boys, but there are girls who are involved that are doing this. It just didn't end up in the photo because they weren't at that event. So I asked them, their primary thing was like, hey, this is riddles and computers. Well, what's not to like? They thought I was asking them, a question, a rhetorical question, like everyone should be involved in this. I was really trying to hone in with our students about what distinguishes your interest in information security, and how is it distinguished from all the other options you have at our school? I mean, I showed you that there are 14 different tracks that students can go into in STEM. So why is this one standing out to them? So they like that it's multidisciplinary, multiple solutions, real-world applications, and this, this deep need to understand vulnerabilities that we naturally take for granted when we're using devices. So they have a sense of social responsibility and love open source, talking about open source platforms and vulnerabilities and contributing to that. And knowing that like the plane is equal, right? There's not this stratification and hierarchy in information security fields, at least when it's open source. It's like everyone gets to contribute right from the get-go. It doesn't matter your age. If you figure something out, people share it. So the implications that I've learned, they love these competitions. I said, how'd you get involved? They said, someone told me about a competition. Boom, and got involved. So I think actually, if you are a government or corporate, just contact as many local schools as you can to get them involved. That's the first step in really getting people going. And if you're a curriculum specialist, because computer architecture is not a natural course or elective that's offered in most high schools, we need curriculum specialists to help draw curriculum connections as best as we can, just to get them engaged, because the students find it really fascinating. There's also summer research opportunities that are all over the place. This one is an interesting engineering challenge that occurred. This was like this last spring. Someone carjacked or car hacked and controlled someone else's car remotely. I don't know if you saw this story or not. You can imagine driving on the highway and someone all of a sudden takes control of your car because they have the ability to do so. That's an interesting engineering challenge that's connected to security. So it's not just information security, it's a security our own engineering. So we had students who worked on a project and worked with a professional on that. So it's another way of engaging students. I really think the greatest opportunity of expanding our pipeline, particularly in information security and cybersecurity, is finding ways in how government, corporations, and schools all can work together to provide these launching points for students. And I'm hopeful, obviously, for my son as well. So my slide deck is at that website. You're welcome to download it, or you're welcome to email me and say, can you send me the slide deck, or any of the references that I mentioned in this presentation. I'm happy to provide them to you. So at that is an opportunity to take any questions that you may have.
There's got to be a few questions.
Sure, I'll start with
Your school has a Cisco Networking Academy?
We don't actually. So so our school is, our students that get involved in networking is really, our school is structured in a way in which 1/8 of the students' week is divided where they can pursue their own interests or provide or obtain academic support. And so we have a group of systems administrators that's a student-led, it's like a club, and they essentially mentor each other, but there isn't a formalized academy. Now there are 2 programs that do have academies from Marshall High School and Chantilly High School that have academies that make available networking certification opportunities to students. But for our school, it's either just getting involved in a research project or using part of that flex period to pursue this solely based on interest. Other questions? Yes?
You talked a little bit about curricular versus co-curricular activities, clubs, and competitions, etc. I wonder if you could talk about other kind of social, recreational, sports, any research or experiences in terms of somebody being well-rounded, so they're not just focused on an academic topic per se. Is there any research that suggests that people who are more active in other areas outside of the topic area of interest?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I'm not aware of any research. There may be. If anyone has that, certainly send that along to me and I can reflect on that. I mean, the question was, a lot of the research that I've identified is associated with how students are engaged in STEM and some of the other factors such as family and social culture and so forth. But I haven't seen research about students being involved in other things and whether or not that maintains or detracts their interest in that as a profession. Yes?
Yes, so your presentation was great, and it focused on factors that influence and increase. In your research, did you find anything that was proven to decrease involvement in STEM?
Decrease interest in STEM, yes, and I think that's where some of the stereotypes, so in some of those factors that were up there, there were some that detracted, women's interest or minority interest in STEM, things that we may do, particularly on the family side. Other questions? Yes?
Well, for one thing, your work reminds me of John Hattie's work in visible learning, trying to compare these effects, and it's always messy because I'm curious to hear you talk about this, like the science experiment, getting involved in independent science research. That might be correlation, of course, and not causation. And you have all your students do science fair experiments, you see no effect because it was the students that were interested that did the science research. So I'm interested to hear you talk about that. And then another question I wanted to ask is about the slide that had from Ty's research with the side-by-side 8th grade interest. I wondered if you might be able to sit back to that. You say, well, so gain interest early, which is a drum that I beat often and loudly, and yet in that graph, you look at the high-performing students, it appears to have no effect.
You're talking about this graph?
Yeah.
So the first comment you made about Hattie's research, I actually think Hattie's research is stronger than the stuff that I'm sharing with you in terms of empirical comparisons. So Hattie's research actually had a relative comparison of the strength, the effect size of how certain factors influence student achievement. And he was looking at meta-analysis.
Yes.
I mean, much larger set of research and more empirical. In my presentation here, I'm actually just saying this isn't necessarily all empirical, one, and I'm not comparing them, I'm just saying here's the factors. Hattie actually goes through some relative strengths. He's saying this is what's making a huge difference, and this is what's not making a difference at all. In my presentation here, I actually don't have that at all. Perspectives and why doing a meta-analysis comparing effect sizes would be really difficult because of some of these messy variables. Now my presentation is just saying, look, here are a bunch of independent studies, and here's a summary of them. And I frankly was asking your advice on what you thought made a difference, because I don't know the answers, but my own professional experience, I have personally witnessed those 16 different variables and see kids get excited or shy away. But that's anecdotal. There are research studies. So this research study actually involved many thousands of students. So they're essentially surveying alumni who are 5, 10, 15 years out from high school and saying, you went to a STEM specialty school. Tell us if you're in a STEM field or not. What are you doing now? And now start answering these questions about which of the factors that influenced your decision to pursue STEM. And so all this study says is those are the ones that stood out the most. Could there be limitations with that study of questions that were not asked in the survey? Absolutely, yeah. That's a limitation of social science research in general. There's always questions that are not asked. And we're always dealing with people and their perceptions. It's a perception study.
Other
Any
questions? There's got to be a few more. How about some of the students have a question?
Sure.
Yeah, there's one up there.
I'm sorry, which slide? Oh yeah, so I have the address where you can download my slide deck, or my email address. You can send me an email and say, hey, can you send me the slide deck? And if you have further questions or want to know the citations for any of these research articles, I'm more than happy to send them to you.